Okay, let's get started. My name is Laura Winnie. I am the Education Coordinator for DuPage County Animal Services. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. We are going to go over SHED, shelter, healthcare, exercise, and diet for small animals. So we have a different presentation that covers dogs, cats, and rabbits. Tonight, we're going to go over many of the popular pets. We're going to go over what the basics of SHED is. We'll cover small mammals, examples of snakes, lizards, aquatic turtles, and birds. If you have specific questions about any of these animals, feel free to throw them into the chat box at any time. I'll check the chat at the end of the presentation, which should run about an hour, but then I'll stay on for question and answers at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in there at any point. Just know that I won't look at the chat until the end of the presentation. Right now, we are all set to mute to prevent audio interference. We are recording this presentation to put up on our YouTube page later on. So please do keep yourselves muted and your video off for the duration of the presentation. Also in the chat box, I threw in the link to our program survey. I'm always looking for feedback, what we're doing great, what we can improve on, and ideas for future presentations. Always love to hear from you guys. So without further ado, let's do a deep dive into who we have. Now today, we're not going to discuss ferrets, sugar gliders, some that are also very popular, but if you do have specific questions about those, I am happy to answer that. So tonight, this information is applicable to all sorts of information. Basically, any pet that we're going to be taking care of is going to need these four basic things. So shelter, healthcare, exercise, and diet. And it does tie into what's known as the 5 freedoms. So these 5 freedoms were originally developed to talk about agricultural animals, but it's very all-encompassing for any animal that a person is taking care of. And some of it's pretty obvious, but some of it is a little bit more complicated. So we'll just go over them real quick. Freedom for hunger and thirst. So we need to make sure that we're feeding our animals, not only just providing food, but making sure that they can eat that food and that it's nutritious, right? It's not just stuff that's going to fill them up and they're not going to be, they're not going to have the proper nutrients. We need to make sure that it's appropriate for the animal, for their age, and for their medical needs. We also need to make sure that we are providing fresh, clean water to them at all times as well. So freedom from discomfort. That shelter goes right into that. So we need to make sure that we're protecting them from the weather and getting them anything that they need that way. Free from pain, injury, or disease. We're going to be making sure that we take our animals to the vet. We recommend once a year, regardless on if you're seeing any health concerns, because a lot of animals are super good at hiding illnesses, and it can be hard to tell when they need veterinary care. So taking them every single year, the veterinarian can then look and figure out what the baseline is. Like, okay, this is what your animal looks like on a perfectly normal day. Anything that deviates, that might be a problem, something for concern. But they're also going to be looking for stuff that we can't see, especially things like blood work or looking at, inside their ears or inside their eyes or inside their mouths, places that we don't normally look, to see, okay, is something happening here that might be a problem later on? Because prevention, just like with humans, it's always going to be easier and cheaper to prevent an illness than to treat it after it becomes a problem. So that healthcare is a major, major factor there. Freedom to exercise normal behaviors. This one can get a little funky for us because, let's face it, sometimes pets do normal behaviors that we think are weird and we don't like them and we don't want them in our home. So a great example of that pretty much everybody's familiar with is male dogs like to pee on stuff. Okay, so that one's a pretty normal behavior that is not super fun for us. Other things that you might see is animals that are making specific noises at specific times. So the goal for us is to find ways for them to do things that come naturally, but any way that's not going to harm us, harm themselves, hurt our furniture, or drive us absolutely bonkers. So there are lots of different ways, and it's called enrichment. So using enrichment is going to be a big key there. And that falls right under exercise. And then freedom from fear and distress. So we want to make sure that to the best of our ability, we are providing a comfortable home, not just physically, but mentally as well. And that our animals are not exhibiting any behaviors that show that they're stressed out all the time or that they're afraid, and that we are doing the best possible things to make their environment comfortable for them. Okay. So let's do a deep dive into what these 4 things mean: the shelter, healthcare, exercise, and diet. So shelter is exactly what it sounds like. We want to provide them basic comforts. For our littler animals, this is going to be a really big deal because typically they're going to be somewhat enclosed into their space. And it's going to be pretty much what they know most of the day, you know, whether it's a snake in a tank, or it's a bird in their little bird cage, or it's a guinea pig in their pen. This is what they're going to know for most of their lives. So we want it to be comfortable, and we want it to adequately supply their needs. So they need to be able to move around, right? You don't want something that's too small and then, you know, they're super, super cramped. You want to have a separate space for their toilet needs. So that helps with that whole big enough to move around thing. We also want to have areas where they can use the bathroom and they're not sleeping in their own grossness, right? That's not fun. No one wants to do that. We also want to provide them mental stimulation within their environment. So we will do a huge deep dive into that in just a minute. They also need to be able to rest. So a lot of the animals that we're going to talk about today are prey animals, meaning that things like to eat them when they're out in the wild. And for a prey animal to feel comforted and feel secure enough to be able to go to sleep, they might need a burrow. They might need a covered area, like a little hidey box, something like what I have shown here for these rabbits, so that they will feel secure and they're not going to be super stressed out wondering if something's going to come at them. That's an instinct. So even though, you know, they've never had a hawk swoop into the living room, that's still an instinct of those little animals to be worried about it. We also definitely want to make sure that we are protecting them from the elements, which we'll talk more about here in just a second. And animals are going to have different needs and different preferences. So even if you have owned hamsters your whole life, got to pay attention if an individual hamster is telling you, you know, I really don't like this exercise wheel, it makes me nervous. Then we need to pay attention to that, and we need to figure out something else out, because not every single animal, like not every single human animal, is going to like the exact same things. So paying attention to individual needs and their preferences is a very important part of being a guardian. Now, when it comes to protecting our animals from the elements, there is a great risk with any time that we keep our animals outside. So sometimes it's tempting, especially with some of these animals that we would normally find outside. So for example, red-eared slider turtles do live in the wild in different parts of the country, but they do not live in the wild up here. Our winters are much too harsh for them. And the risk of having them outdoors, not only concerns about weather, but also thinking about disease transmission and predation. You know, what animals do we keep that maybe are prey animals? There's a lot of them, those guinea pigs, those hamsters, even those smaller snakes, those little birds, they can all be considered a prey animal. You know, if they look kind of like dinner and they sound kind of like dinner and they're really easy to get to, a hawk, a fox, a coyote isn't necessarily going to be like, oh no, that's a pet, I shouldn't eat that one. They're going to go for the easiest meal possible. Also, sometimes when we have these animals outdoors, it makes it harder for us to interact with them. So that can lead to boredom on the part of our animals and even some risk of neglect and not catching signs of health concerns. So at DuPage County Animal Services, we always highly recommend to have pets indoors. You know, securely, we can take them for little jaunts as long as they are supervised and we're making sure that everything's okay. But we ideally want to keep our pets indoors. That's going to be the safest place for them. Now, with that being said, it is not illegal to house a pet outside. So just because your neighbor keeps rabbits in a hutch or has guinea pigs in a hutch outdoors, that doesn't necessarily mean they're breaking the law, as long as adequate shelter is provided, adequate and sanitary food and water, that they are attending to their animals' medical needs, and that they are following local ordinances. So it is not illegal, but it is very, very far from ideal to have those pets outdoors. Now let's move on and check out healthcare. Now, especially with these smaller animals, we really want to pay attention to which veterinarian we're going to, because for the most part, veterinarians are for what's known as companion animals, cats and dogs, and that's it. Even rabbits are going to need what's known as an exotic vet. It's a specialty veterinarian that knows more about these particular animals. So if you want a bearded dragon, awesome, great, but you're probably not going to be able to go to the same veterinarian that you take your cat Whiskers. Okay, you're going to need to do some research and find one of those exotic vets that specializes in these animals. And when you find those, specialty vets are fewer and far between, but that doesn't mean you need to compromise on principles or anything like that. Specialty vets will be more expensive, but even then, there can be ranges in prices. The size of the staff, how many people are going to be attending to you? Is it going to be multiple veterinarians? Is it going to be the same one? You know, how important is that relationship with your veterinarian? It's very important to some, it's not so important to others. Also, what training they have. So if you are going to a veterinarian specifically for your bearded dragon, but they specialize more in other types of reptiles, that's a conversation you're going to need to have with your veterinarian to see if they're even comfortable fully treating if something happens. Now, with all pet professionals, we recommend to look into fear-free philosophies as best you can, because this takes into account the mental and emotional well-being of the pets. Because let's face it, going to the vet is scary no matter who you are, whether you're a cat, you're a dog, you're a rabbit, you're a hamster, you're a parakeet. It is scary going someplace and getting poked and prodded by a stranger. So fear-free professionals, whether they've been certified through the organization or whether they've done outside homework on their own, they're going to use practices to try to reduce that fear, anxiety, and the stress in pets while they're in their care. And what's great too is the fear-free certification program also has education for pet owners, and they do have some tidbits for small pet owners. They do typically focus more on the cats and the dogs, but you can look into other ways as well on their site, other animals as well. Now, exercise. We want to make sure that we meet the physical needs of our pets, because you feel good when you're tired, right? It releases those endorphins, it prevents obesity and all sorts of diet related complications. And it promotes that healthy digestion, decreases destructive behaviors because they're bored or they're trying to get away from you. And it does strengthen that bond. Many of these animals can form bonds with their guardians, and exercise and enrichment is a great way to do that. Now, the mental exercise is just as important. So a lot of these animals can be trained. They can do tricks, or they can do what's known as husbandry behaviors. And that's, for example, showing a foot to help to make sure that there's nothing going on with the bottom of the foot, okay? Maybe, going into a carrier on their own so that you can take them to the vet. Those are known as husbandry behaviors because it helps us take better physical care of the animals, but the training for those behaviors stimulates their mental faculties as well. So it's kind of a twofold benefit for stuff like that. And then, of course, enrichment, letting them express these natural behaviors, even if it sometimes looks like an unnatural way, okay? So as I mentioned, we can do training abilities with a lot of these animals. Guinea pigs are burrowing animals, and they will do different agility courses, just like dogs will, with training. And it's a fabulous way to get them to move those muscles, right? That they may not get to just being in a cage all day long. So we want them moving those muscles, figuring out, how does this work? What is this person looking for? Oh, this is how I get my treat. Many guinea pigs are very food motivated, so that can be a really fun way to dole out like the veggies and the fruits that they get very excited for and squeak over, or even some of those more high-end treats that are only, given out sometimes. There are lots of different types of enrichment. It's not all just, going over hurdles and gates and things like that. Sensory, so exploring their senses, textures, smells, making sure doing our research that those are appropriate and that they won't cause any harm. Physical enrichment is going to be switching up what they have available for them in their space. Mental is that training, getting them to think, problem solve. Food puzzles are really good for that. Environmental, again, we're switching up what's going on around them, and a lot of these overlaps. That sensory, that physical, we can overlap those. And then social enrichment, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's letting them spend time with either like species or different species, namely you, okay? And that's very important for many animals. You definitely need to do your research on that, because one of my favorite facts about guinea pigs is that in South America in the wild, they're a herd animal. So they live in really big groups. And I just really, really want to see a stampede of guinea pigs before I die. I think that sounds really, really fun. And so because of that tendency, because of that need in their behavior, they need a lot of socialization when they are in our homes. So they do really great with buddies. Having multiple guinea pigs helps with that. Or if they don't have that, then they need a lot of time with you, because they are very social animals, just like we are, just like dogs are. And that's something that is going to stress them out if they are deprived of that. Diet is so species specific that you really, really need to do your research. And also you need to pay attention to whose research are you looking into. You want to use good sources. So humane societies, veterinarians, veterinarian associations, breed-specific or species-specific rescues are going to have great information on their websites. I wouldn't go with whatever user.name says on Reddit unless they have something to back that up. You want something with credentials, because just like with humans, a lot of this stuff gets lost in translation. We play telephone, like, oh, I heard that you can give carrots to guinea pigs every single day. I heard that you should only give carrots to guinea pigs. Don't feed them anything else. Please, please, please do not just feed carrots to guinea pigs. That's very bad. But you can see how it goes down the line. And with each step, the information changes just a little bit. So you definitely want to go straight to those reputable sources to find that information. We also want to make sure that we are paying attention to what our veterinarian recommends. They're going to have the latest research on nutrition and diet. And we also want to know what to avoid. So if we are trying something new, we want to make sure that we have done our research that that is okay, and we want to do it little by little. We don't want to make huge sudden changes in diet for any animal because that can be very, very upsetting for them. When we are doing this training with our enrichment and we are using maybe treats, if our animals are food motivated, then we need to make sure that we are balancing their regular diet with the extras, with the good stuff, all right? It's just like with us. When I want to go out and have a giant ice cream sundae on a Friday, I try to eat a few more vegetables at lunch, you know, just to balance things out. We don't want to go crazy every single day. So now that we've covered the basics of what shed is, we can go and look a little bit more specifically into some of these animals. So let's start with our small mammals. Now this does run a gamut. You can have the tiny, tiny little hamsters and gerbils that only live to 1 or 2 years. Pet rats, a little bit longer than that, 2 to 3 years, all the way up to guinea pigs, which can live up to 7 years with the proper care. And different sizes, different types of animals, their cost is going to be significantly different as well. So between $400 per year for some of those smaller mammals, and we can get, you know, close to $1,000 or even over that for our guinea pigs. And a lot of that is going to be food related, and it's going to be habitat related, so their environment. We'll talk more about that in just a second. When we have these animals, as I mentioned before, a lot of times they're spending a significant amount of their life inside their pens. So we definitely want to make sure that it's a good place to live, right? We don't want them in, you know, 4 white walls, nothing going on, nothing to do, nothing to see. Very, very boring. We want them to be engaged with their space so that even when we're not around, they're not just bored out of their minds. So when we look at different types of layouts, you can see over on the right-hand side, we have 2 different examples. So up on top is a pen for guinea pigs. So that doesn't need to be closed off at the top. Guinea pigs are known for climbing. So just the open top is going to be fine for them. If you have other animals in the house that may be a little too interested, or you have small children who may be too interested, then you might want to consider having a covered top. Some of our other animals, though, you're definitely going to want to have covered all sides. Mice, rats, hamsters, gerbils, you want to have them completely enclosed because they can get very, very crafty and go and explore parts of the house that maybe you don't want them in. Having different levels is a great way to make the most use of your space. Most of these animals will enjoy a good climb up a ladder or a ramp or even like a little swinging thing. And there are lots of different options there. So you can see down on the bottom for our rats, there's a ramp, there's a little hammock to crawl up into from the ramp, and then they can get up to those different levels and then into that enclosed hammock up above. So those hideaways are going to be very important. All of these are prey animals. They're all going to feel very vulnerable if they don't have a place to hide out. We also want to make sure that we are providing them water. You can use water bottles or you can have bowls. That's a conversation to have with your veterinarian, specifically for which one you're looking at. And chew toys are essential here. So you definitely want them to have access to wooden items, straw, hay 24/7, because, or even other items within their diet, because their teeth grow continuously. And not being able to chew means that their teeth are going to get too big and they won't be able to eat and digest properly. So they need to have something to help them file down their teeth, just like we use a nail file for our fingernails that grow continuously. They need something for their teeth so that don't just grow and grow and grow and grow. Now, when it comes to exercise within these spaces, I would say to use caution with exercise wheels. Make sure that it's something that's not going to cause an animal to get trapped in them or feel like they're trapped. So some of like the ones that kind of look like satellite dishes are a good option because there's no way for an animal to get stuck in there, okay? The exercise balls, studies have shown that they're a little bit more harmful than helpful because rather than feeling secure, it's more of a panicky, trapped, oh my gosh, what am I doing? What is going on here? And then that carbon dioxide can build up within the exercise ball. And also it's very hard to size those properly. And you never want to have an exercise ball that's too small for your animal and puts compression on their spine. So definitely make sure that if you're using those exercise wheels that we were doing so with caution, and those exercise balls should be very, very limited and with supervision at all times. Now, as I mentioned, that continuous tooth growth is going to be a major factor in the foods that they get. So checking out the different animals, what they're going to need is going to vary by what kind of jaw muscle configuration that they have. So we don't really care about the squirrels today. So let's look at the last two. So the guinea pig, they have those molars and they're pretty flat. They do have some, incisors that will help tear and rip at the grass, but it's mostly going to the back there and it's being chewed constantly. So they need that constant supply of hay available 24/7 to help keep those molars ground down and so that those incisors can rip and tug and also keep those down. Now, rats are going to need a combination of seeds, nuts, and grasses or hay for that, because how do I want to explain this? Their jaw configuration, how it moves in their mouth, it's focusing on the incisors equally as well as the molars. So both are working just as hard at the same time, okay? So they need to be able to do both. With these animals, as I mentioned before, they do have different needs socially. Guinea pigs are herd animals. Some hamsters need to be solitary. Typically, most of these small mammals are going to do better with a buddy. So it's very, very important to look into that. They also are going to need calmer environments. So if you want to set up your guinea pig habitat right in the middle of the living room and you have smaller children who bring their friends over and you have a teenager who brings their friends over and it's always chaos all the time in the living room, that's going to be very, very stressful. You might want them to be in a more quiet, secluded place that's still accessible, that we can still see, we can still go to multiple times a day, but that's not constant, loud, changing environment 24/7. Now, several species are commonly kept as pets for snakes. So king snakes, rat snakes, garter snakes, corn snakes, different pythons, different boa constrictors, especially the common boa constrictor. All of these species are going to need different things. So if you have specific questions about a specific snake, that's something to ask a herpetologist, reptile person, snake person, okay, or a veterinarian that's familiar with reptiles. they're going to be your best resources there. Today, we're going to talk about the ball python, and a lot of this does cover across the board with different snake species. So ideally, when we are looking at getting a pet snake, we only want to get captive bred animals. We never want to pull from the environment ourselves because that can upset the ecosystem. And any wild caught snakes that we get from a less than reputable source, those snakes are going to be less tolerant of stress, more likely to refuse food given to them by humans. And a lot of times they have higher internal and external parasites that's going to affect their quality of life. So we really want to look into rescues and reputable breeders for our reptile needs. And that's across the board. So with our ball pythons, they can live up to 40 years. So that is a commitment. If your 9-year-old child wants to get a ball python, ask them, okay, are you going to take it up until basically you retire? Are you going to have that ball python for most of your adult life as well? That's a conversation you definitely want to have. If everybody in the family are snake enthusiasts, and then when the child goes off to college and she doesn't want the ball python anymore, but mom and dad are still cool with it, awesome, that's great. Just know that they are a long-term commitment. Typically, the most costs are going to be those startup costs, buying the tank, buying the lights, buying all the stuff that they need. So that first year is going to be fairly expensive, $900 to $1,000. After that, ball pythons don't eat a whole lot. They don't need a whole lot. You're changing out light bulbs. You're providing food every few days, few weeks. So annual care costs, relatively low, $250 to $350. Reptiles has fabulous information on all sorts of reptiles. So I highly recommend them for resources. And some common myths for pet snakes is that they are aggressive. No, most snakes are pretty chill. They're looking to eat once every while, and then after that, they just live their life. They just hang out. Okay, it's actually sounds pretty awesome. Unlike their reputation, snakes are not slimy. They're not mucusy. Their scales are dry and kind of shiny. So there's really nothing to describe how a snake feels, but you don't come off with residue or anything like that on your hands. I personally don't think that the snake actually smells like much. Their tanks can, if not properly cleaned, but that has more to do with their waste than their scales. They are also not super active animals. It's not like you're going to be sitting in front of them, watching them zoom back and forth inside their enclosure, okay? They are, for the most part, lurking to strike, and they are then spending a lot of their energy digesting their food, and that's an internal process. So externally, you don't see a whole lot going on, but they need to use a lot of energy to digest because they do swallow their food whole. So it does take a lot of energy to process that. Now, they can be quite escape artists. So it is very important that you are paying attention to the type of enclosure that they have. And as your snake grows, their enclosure is going to need to grow with them. So ideally, as long as your snake is the diagonal of the tent, so from one corner to another corner, you definitely want to have some place where they can hide and relax and also cool down. So a half log is great because it's open on both sides. Perfect there. You want to have temperature controlled areas. So you need to have those UVA, those UVB lights to provide heat for them. Because remember, these animals are cold-blooded or ectotherms. They are getting their body temperature from their environment. So if they get cold, they move into the light. If they get overheated, they move into a nice shady, cool spot to cool down. We also want to make sure that we are controlling the humidity. This is very, very important for their skin health. They do shed their skin every few weeks, and they're going to need a proper humidity level in order to do that, because what you want to see is that whole snake skin come off. Okay, if it's coming off in bits and pieces, that's a time we need to talk to a veterinarian about what might be happening there. We also want a substrate that you can clean. So sand is fine because we can scoop out the dirty parts. Pebbles and rocks get a little harder because you need to have a system in place to make sure that those are cleaning. We also want to have a shallow dish for soaking. That's also going to be helping them with their skin health there. They will explore their enclosure. Like I said, it's not like constant 24/7. They're moving around, zooming about the enclosure, but they will check it for weak spots. I compare it to the velociraptors in Jurassic Park, right? They check the perimeter. They want to see like, okay, where can I move? Where can I get out? Having climbing opportunities, tree limbs, other things like that to just give them different points of view, and also to help them figure out their perfect temperature within the tank is going to be very helpful. Definitely want to have time for them to explore the area, give them that different physical environment, and also handling time with you. And we do want to pay attention to their behavior. So if they are moving around a lot, that might be a sign that they are trying to actively hunt, and we need to think about what our feeding schedule is for them. Are they really lethargic? Are they not moving a lot? Maybe we're feeding too much, or the tank is too small and they're unable to move around and get that proper exercise and stretch out. As far as their healthcare and their diets, it's going to vary by their age and by the size. But ideally, what you want to look at is this little pyramid shape, right? Okay, so that's the ideal physique. So when you look at them, like please don't, but if we were to take a cross section, it would be like a little, kind of like an upside down candy corn, all right? It would be fat on the bottom, and it'd be like a little rounded point up top where their spine is. We never want them to be to the point where they are circular or blobby, because that is a sign that we are either overfeeding, that we are not providing the right exercise, or that something is going on. Now, for our ball pythons, 1 mouse every 5 to 14 days. It can depend on the guardian, whether you want to do that as live feedings or not. That is a you call. Do your research. I do know, though, that based on some studies, it is much harder to transition once you've done the live feeding to not. So sometimes it's easier just to start with the frozen or refrigerated mice rather than the live feeding, because it can be harder to transition away from that. Now, in the wild, snakes can fast, especially if they get a bigger than normal mouse. They might not keep on that same timetable. So pay attention to your snake's physique, pay attention to their behavior, recommendations from your vet. You may not need to do that every 5 days. It might be closer to that 14 days. And maybe once we skip a meal every once in a while. Again, pay attention to what is going on with your snake and follow the recommendations of your veterinarian. For our snakes, so much of whether they are healthy or not is going to rely on the type of enclosure they have and the diet that is being provided for them. So they need to be able to move around, okay? That minimum that I talked about, the diagonal, that's the minimum, all right? You can always have bigger and give them other opportunities. We want to avoid overfeeding, so weighing the snake every single week, make it part of your routine with that floor time, with that bonding time. Then we can have that baseline ready to go. So if there's a little bit of a drop or a little bit of a rise, you're aware of it even before you see the change in the physique. That humidity is going to be key. Pay attention to what the veterinarian and experts recommend. It can be quite a bit higher for some species and relatively low depending on others. Just like with all these animals, we do recommend those annual vet visits, even if you don't see anything wrong, because they can find things you can't see, especially looking for parasites. Doing a fecal exam should be key to that annual visit every single year. So for our lizards, we're going to talk about bearded dragons tonight, as they are one of the more popular lizard pet choices. They can live 10 to 15 years. And again, this care cost is going to be significantly higher that first year in preparation for buying everything. So $700, $800 for that first year. Annual care cost, $200 to $400. Most of that's going to be food, okay? Also that annual visit as well. They are very popular pets because they can be pretty expressive. They will recognize their caregivers, and they've been even trained to respond to names and things like that, I have heard. So they have a very curious temperament and array of social behaviors. They're a good, entertaining, and safe first reptile because they are so expressive. It's kind of easier to tell what's going on with them that you may not have with a more difficult to read animal. They have full color vision and they have a great sense of smell. And that's one of the ways that they recognize us is by smelling us. So full grown, 18 to 22 inches and 10 to 18 ounces. So we're not talking dragons here, like full dragons. They're smaller, but they are fast. They can run up to 9 miles an hour. But for the most part, you know, they're lookers rather than doers. Okay, they're going to be chilling out. They're very easygoing. You can leash train them. And there are so many Instagrams out there where bearded dragons are cool with being dressed up in little costumes. So they're easy to handle. They are pretty complacent about it. And that's what makes them so popular. You definitely want to avoid purchasing bearded dragons that are too young. Hatchlings under 3 months are going to be very fragile, defensive. They're going to be easily stressed out. I mean, they're babies, okay? They're also not likely to live very long. So they're really skinny. If they're tiny, chances are they're too young to be sold. So if you are getting them from a pet store or a breeder, make sure to get the age of the dragon. If they don't know, that's a huge red flag. They should know how old this animal is because it is illegal to sell them in certain states at certain ages. Okay, so we definitely want to make sure that we are getting from reputable sources. It is also very easy to find them up for adoption, and typically those are going to be full-grown adults. So what you get is what you're going to have for the rest of their lifetime. For their shelter, they have to have strong, reliable UVB lighting. That is very essential. They need plenty of bright white light for their energy, for their appetite, and also for their mental health. They are sun lovers, so they need that bright light. The minimum we recommend for a tank is 4 feet by 2 foot by 2 foot. That's the minimum. You can go bigger. Do not house them together though. These are solitary animals. The lighting and the terrain requirements, you're going to need to pay attention to the temperature. So a basking surface, like we can see here in the picture, right underneath the lights, you want to have that 108 to 113 degrees. So, I mean, desert animals, okay? They like it nice and hot. The cool side, 77 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. And then at nighttime, you can bring that down, but just know that you need to pay attention because those bulbs can go bad and you'll need to replace them regularly. So having the temperature gauges right there in the tank is going to make it easier to determine when you need to switch out those bulbs. Having hideaways, climbing surfaces, hammocks, and then time outside is going to be essential for them to get their exercise needs. Like I said, they can be leash trained. So you don't have to worry about bringing them out and then all of a sudden they get lost. You can train them to be by your side and explore the environment in a safe way. Just like with so many of these animals, their healthcare is dependent on getting a really good, healthy diet. So we're looking at leafy greens and vegetables, fruits, proteins, and treats. It varies by age. So 6 months old and younger, those are the hatchlings. They're going to be wanting insects, those proteins, twice a day, vegetables daily, okay? Juveniles, that's 6 to 12 months, insects once a day, those proteins once a day, vegetables daily, of course. Adults over a year old, insects only a couple times a week, 1 to 2 times a week, but vegetables daily. Once your bearded dragon has reached adulthood, it is safe and recommended to skip a feeding 1 day each week. All right. In the wild, they wouldn't have access to the smorgasbord that we provide in our households. So fasting is a perfectly normal part of their routine. It helps prevent them from getting obese, and it's healthier for them. It keeps up with their natural rhythms. You're not being cruel. You're not depriving them of food. You're just keeping everything in balance. The best rule of thumb when you're doing the insects, offer as many insects as your beardy will eat within 5 minutes, okay? So as they eat, provide more on the timer at 5 minutes, stop. Because you don't want to have a stockpile up that can lead to obesity issues. We also want to be aware of wild caught bugs because they might have a whole sorts of things that you don't want to expose your animal to. So I would definitely recommend staying with the store-bought. You can get them in bulk, and that can help with the price. Just like with all these animals, we want to make sure that we are getting them adequate sanitary water, making sure that it doesn't build up a film or anything like that. Weighing weekly will help to make sure that we are watching their dietary needs and we're not overfeeding or we're not, slacking off on the exercise needs. And then making sure that we are seeing our vet once a year. Aquatic turtles, I do have a full red-eared slider presentation here on YouTube, so feel free to check it out, and it goes way far in depth. But for those who just want a little bit of a snapshot, we'll talk about red-eared sliders, and they are a commitment. So they can live over 50 years. Females tend to be bigger. They're going to be 10 to 14 inches long, males 6 to 9 inches long. If you get a little hatchling and you want to know what you have, wait till they grow. And then that's how you can tell. It's really, really difficult to tell otherwise. So you're going to have to just kind of wait and see. That startup cost for the first year is going to be key because they need a lot of accessories. Aquatic turtles have a lot of needs that we'll talk about more in depth. So $1,700 minimum for that first year to get all the equipment you need. $200 to $500 every year after for that. And that's going to be lights, filters for the water, food, things like that. These animals are not a starter pet for very young children. They have a very specialized diet. They have a very specialized need. They can get rather large, and their habitats can be pretty difficult for the average person to maintain. Also, they're not necessarily cuddly reptiles. They're not necessarily super social with us. So there is a big risk with when we get these guys as itty bitty little ones from flea markets, pet stores, whatever, the cute factor does wear off. And then we get bored with the animal, but we still have 50 years to go. So definitely do your research before investing and bringing home that aquatic turtle. So with their shelter, you can do the tank route where you can see through the side, just like an aquarium tank that you can see here on the bottom. The rule of thumb is 10 gallons of water for every inch of turtle, okay? The other way around that, because those tanks can be pretty expensive, is you can do something called a stock tank. So I've got a little video here to show you what that looks like. You can get these at farm and home stores. You can order them in. The downside here is that you can't see in the sides, but they are much more durable than those aquatic tanks, and they are much more cost affordable. Also, typically you get this one big size and that's it. If you get the aquariums, you have to keep buying as they get older and as they get bigger. You want to have a basking area where they have access to get completely dry. You want them to be able to get out of the water completely. So using ramps is a great way to get them that. Air bubblers will help oxygenate the water. That's essential if you want to have fish in the same tank. You don't need them, but it does help provide some environmental enrichment for the turtle, and it does prevent slime and muck buildup. The UVB rays are crucial for the health and development of your turtle, and they need it to produce vitamin D and to metabolize the calcium. So the distance from the basking dock should be 5 to 7 inches, and you do need to replace it about every 6 months because they do weaken over time. The UVA is for heat. So the heat entices the turtle to come bask there. So the UVA is the attractant to the UVB where they get those essential nutrients. You want to have that a little bit more, 10 to 12 inches. 85 watts recommended for hatchlings, less for turtles. If they're aging and they're not basking as much, you can up the wattage up to 100. It's easier to get a stand so you can adjust the height and also to make sure that they're not going to tip over. That basking area needs to be about 90 degrees, and we also need to pay attention to the water temperature as well. 80 degrees for those babies, 75 to 78 for juveniles and adults. And we also need to pay attention to those lights and give them a circadian rhythm. So those lights aren't on 24/7, just like the sun isn't out 24/7. Need to give them at least 8 hours of nighttime. And then in the winter, we can do a little bit longer, just like, I mean, you can even just follow the pattern of the sun. That makes it a little bit easier. Like, oh, sun's down, okay, it's time to turn off the lights. For their health care, this does change with age. The hatchlings, the babies, are going to need a lot more protein as opposed to veggies. Adults are going to need more veggies and less protein. So here's some information. I'm not going to go into it because we are running short on time, but paying attention to what they need and what is good for them, and also understanding that some of these foods are sometimes food. Okay, so those richer veggies, like the higher ones, the romaine, the carrots, things like that, every once in a while. They don't need to be every day. Instead, green leaf lettuce and dandelion greens, aquatic plants, those are the ones that we should be looking at giving every day. As for our parakeets, we're going to talk about budgies today. Now, they are a fairly easy bird to care for. Their lifespan is reasonable, 10 to 15 years as far as pets go. So it's on par with cats, dogs, rabbits, things like that. $300 for the first year. That's going to be buying some of the stuff that we'll need, their cages, food bowls. And then annual care cost, $200, maybe $250 depending on vet needs, or if you're looking into specialty seed blends. Worldbirds.org has fabulous resources on all types of different birds. Now, I will caution you, Parakeets live 10 to 15 years. Parrots live much, much longer, over 100 years. Okay, so do not get a parrot thinking, oh, I heard that they only live 15 years. No, no, no. Very different species, very different needs. We're going to talk about parakeets. It's much more popular and for most of us, much more reasonable for our budget and for our expectations. They are very sociable animals. They do great with a buddy because it is impractical for us to be there 24/7. And that's just the end all be all. So they do best when there is multiples there in the cage, especially pairs. Introducing later on can cause conflicts. It's just like introducing, the new kid in school. Not everybody gets along with everybody. So sometimes easiest way to go is to get two at the same time that you already know get along well. So from the breeder, the rescue, pet store, get two that have already been introduced and keep them together. Now, here key is going to be places for them to perch, different levels, but we want to pay attention to the temperature. We want to avoid having them near windows where there are drafts or even over like our hot air registers as well. For two parakeets, the recommended minimum is 36 inches by 28 inches by 44 inches. Okay, so quite a big a space so that they can move around in there. We also want to make sure that we're providing those food bowls and those water bowls and enrichment items. So toys that they can shred, chew, ways they can forage for their food, bell toys, things that make noise, and things to climb on. So here in this particular environment, you can see we have different ladders, we have mirrors, things with bells on them, all sorts of different things to engage with. If you are comfortable in your home, allowing them out of cage time is also really, really fun, but please be cautious about how you're going to get them back into that space. So I would recommend doing little bits at a time before we let them into the room at large. So what are ways that we can keep areas enclosed? Well, you can do the good old-fashioned pillow fort, okay? And I'm totally not kidding about this. You can limit the size of the room using sheets. Remember, go all the way to the ceiling with that so that you are comfortable handling the animal, you are comfortable getting them back into the space. Maybe we work on some recalls and we get their favorite treat when they come to you, and then that's how we put them in. Training is really, really great for things like this. And of course, we definitely need to do our research on what we are providing them. So these are seed eaters. They can also do vegetables. Pellets are typically made to mimic seeds, and they will often have nutrients from a mix of grains and seeds in there. Fruits have a pretty high sugar content, so those should be a sometimes, a couple times a week. Vegetables, those can be every day though. So for example, some healthy vegetables might be tomatoes or cucumbers, carrots, zucchini, even asparagus. Safe fruits, bananas, apricots, peaches, apples, no seeds though. You don't want to give them the seeds of an apple. And fresh berries. Legumes, beans are a good option as well. So cooked beans or peas are a nice safe treat. You can get store-bought treats, treat sticks, the spray millet, even mealworms. Those need to be very, very small quantity though, okay? So just like with the fruits, that high sugar content makes it a sometimes food. That high protein content of the mealworms, we definitely want to make sure that that's a sometimes food as well. When we are concerned about their healthcare, we definitely need to be looking for loss of appetite, any behavior changes, the feathers. Are we still molting on a regular basis? What's going on there? We need to look at their feet. So that's great to train them to come onto your hand so you can get close and look at their feet. And we definitely want to do yearly visits to our veterinarian, again, to keep that baseline up to date and also to look for any of those hidden diseases that is harder for us to find. The nail and the wing trimming, that is best left up to a professional. They can get pretty tricky. And the last thing you want to do is damage your relationship with your bird and be seen as a source of stress and pain. Thank everyone for joining me tonight. We do have a few webinars coming up in the future. Solutions with Animal Services during our Animal Shelter Appreciation Week is going to be on November 4th, and Holiday Pet Safety just in time right before Thanksgiving on November 18th. So I hope to see you there. If anybody has any questions, you are free to contact me at any point. humane.education@dupageco.org is the best way to reach me. And you can also see I have my phone number listed here. I am not an expert by all means, but I am always happy to answer what questions I can or try to point you in the best possible direction to get your answers. So it doesn't look like we have any questions. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye-bye.